Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome to Canada. I just got a text on my phone said we're in Canada and we've got the roaming rates of Canada. So either Cobo Hall has just been annexed by Canada or my phone service is wrong. Alhamdulillah, jazakumullahu khaira for attending. As Sister Dalia Mugahid mentioned, this is an early session on Sunday morning, and wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. And so it is a testimony to your striving to seek knowledge, to come to a session this early. And the theme of this convention is surrounding culture and identity. And I wanted to speak a little bit on identity and my personal journey of my search for identity and where I've come from and where I'm going and some of the factors that have influenced that. And you have to excuse me, I'm losing my voice a little. But it's an honor for me to be speaking on this podium of the MSA because the MSA was a factor in the formation of my identity. During high school, one of the first places that I was going to learn more about my faith, alhamdulillah, I was born a Muslim, and I was exposed to going to the masjid and having the Sunday school experience and so forth, but there was something more than the information that I needed, and I didn't realize what it was. It wasn't about the information of Islam, it was about the inspiration of Islam and the impact on my identity. And so the MSA at high school and then at the community college level were factors in that formation of my identity. And the reason why I think it is very important for us as a Muslim community, whether in North America or in other parts of the world, to understand the importance of identity is that it could be the deciding factor between whether or not we die on Islam or not. And I'm not saying that to be just as an exclamation. It's actually something that could happen. Because I have seen people that have studied Islam, they have studied the faith of Islam. They have studied the rules of Islam. But when they haven't resolved their identity as a Muslim, they could easily fall into being weakened in their faith or even at times leaving the faith. So there are people that have memorized the book of Allah. They have memorized the Quran and they have left Islam. There are people who have studied fiqh and studied sharia and they have left Islam. There's people who have studied aqeedah and studied faith deeply and they have left Islam. Now that's not a general rule. The majority of people that memorize the book of Allah, that study the law, the Sharia, they stay as Muslims. And Imam Nawawi mentioned this in his sharh of the Arba'in of Imam Nawawi, rahmakullah, that if you're a Muslim, the overwhelming chances are that you're going to die as a Muslim. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yakhtim lana bil iman, that Allah seals our fate with iman. But there are people that leave. And one of the things that I see is that in their trying to resolve who they are, their identity, that's where the pitfall is to weaken in their faith. So if you look at, for example, Islamic schools, I have seen in my experience in some of the Islamic schools on the West Coast, I'm based in California, that the actual Islamic knowledge that's being taught in Islamic schools is not at a very high level. And I'll be totally honest in terms of I've also administered assessment tests to assess people's students at the 7th and 8th grade level of their understanding of faith and of the rules of practice of worship, fiqh, and of purification of the heart. And it's surprising because it's very low. Now I'm not speaking in general about all of the schools, but in my experience in the schools that I have dealt with, it's not on par with what they should be taught. But one thing that Islamic schools do give is they help in forming that identity. So if you have one person who has been given a lot of information about Islam, but not a lot of identity formation for him, he may go on and the information is not going to protect him. But another person that's been giving a strong Muslim identity, he can always get the information later. And this is not to detract from the importance of knowledge. Ilm is always to be the first priority, but we have to understand the importance of identity. For myself, I realize that identity is a lifelong process. It's a lifelong process. It's not something that you wake up one morning and you say, this is who I am, this is my mission in life, this is what I want to do. It's a changing, ever-changing process. What we want to do as 15-year-olds is different than when we're 30, is different than when we're 40. If we look at the life of Umar radiallahu anhu, we see that his identity was changing throughout his life. And it's a good case study from amongst the Sahaba because he was very outward and animated in his speech and in his actions, and we have a lot of narrations about his life and about his changes. We can see the changes that he's experiencing, and it's a reminder to us that that process is always changing. For me, when I was growing up and trying to figure out what is my identity, what am I going to identify with? If somebody asks me, who are you and where are you going? The question that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks in the Quran, فَأَيْنَ تَذْهَبُونَ? Where are you going? These questions of self-reflections, who are you and where are you going? If somebody asked me that, I was still searching. Right now, I feel more firm in my identity, but I realize there's also a changing process. But growing up as a teenager in this country, I was born in Jordan. My father's Jordanian. My mother's from the States, from Mississippi. And there was a lot of questions that I had. I saw my Muslim family in Jordan on their side and the culture that they had. I saw my mother's family in Mississippi and the culture that they had in Mississippi and Louisiana, being Catholic and Baptist. And so there was a struggle for me. There was a struggle. It was, sometimes people see that I've studied in West Africa, I've studied with shuyukh from Mauritania, and I've been involved in teaching and translating and counseling, and we do a lot of education in the prisons with Muslim prisoners, and they think that that's how I've always been, and that I was just born into that. And they ask me, they say, well, so was your family practicing at this level to where you just woke up one or you just came into the family and this is the way you were? And I have to tell them that that wasn't the case. It was a lifelong process. And as I go through life, the more that I realize about the impacts of our life, there's things that happened even before we were born that's affecting our identity. And we have to come to terms with that. So in my specific case, in my life, my parents met on a picket line in Jackson, Mississippi. So my mother was active in the civil rights for the migrant farm workers through the United Farm Workers and Cesar Chavez and the work that he was doing throughout the U.S. in the early 70s. And my father had his background and experience from coming from Jordan. Those experiences affected me. And even though as a teenager, sometimes when we're looking for our identity or we're as young adults, sometimes we don't want to define ourselves by where we're coming from. We want to create a new identity. We have to realize that our identity is directly impacted by our parents and by their parents and even farther back. There's a book on success called The Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, and he says that who you are and your identity is impacted by your forefathers 300 and 400 years ago. So when we're searching for our identity, we have to understand that. We have to understand our past. And we have to recognize our differences and recognize that those things are affecting our lives. So if a person has an Arab background, if they have a Pakistani background, if they have a South African background, if they have an African American background, we can't deny those influences on our life. We have to search for those, and we have to look into those. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in dealing with the Sahaba, he knew the different cultures that they were coming from within the Jaziratul Arab. And he spoke to them at their levels. So it wasn't that he was trying to negate all of their backgrounds and then create a uniform system. He was respecting the diversity. Even if you look at the clothing of the Prophet ﷺ, and clothing is something that defines an aspect of our identity. Even in his clothing, he respected the diversity. At times he wore a Yemeni cloak. At times he wore a Roman tunic, a Byzantine tunic. At times he wore clothes from other parts of the Arabian Peninsula. Even his sandals, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, were not the typical sandals that the Arabs wore. Because we have detailed descriptions of what he wore. Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma said that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam wore yellow sandals with no hair on them. If you've ever seen some of the traditional sandals that are made from rawhide, they either have the hair left on them from the cow or they don't. The Prophet ﷺ's sandals were hairless. And the reason why, in the tafsir of this hadith, they say the reason why Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma mentioned that is because the Arabs didn't wear those. They wore the sandals with hair. So he was wearing something from outside of the Arab culture. So he took clothing from outside of the Arab culture. He used words from outside of the Arabic language. He respected this diversity. As long as this diversity is within the realms of the Quran and Sunnah, of the proper teachings, then it's acceptable. So we have to search for those differences amongst in our history, in the areas that we were born, and then bring our Islam to fruition. So this identity is very important. The understanding who we are as a Muslim, and understanding it at an intellectual level, and having conviction about it. Having conviction about faith is very important. There's a difference of opinion amongst the ulama that if a person states the shahada, they state the testimony of faith, but they don't have conviction about that, are they a Muslim or not? So they have to identify. It's not just stating the shahada. This is the most important thing of our Islam. The most important part of our Islam, the shahada. If we don't identify with it, there's a difference of opinion of whether or not we're actually even Muslim. And I've seen this in my life. They sometimes give stories of people that are born in very remote areas, and they were just raised, and they said, I said the shahada because my parents said the shahada. I don't know what it means. And there may be people like that. But in my experience, people that have said the shahada without knowing it, sometimes I've seen people doing da'wah, and they talk to them about Islam, and they say, well, do you believe this? Do you believe this? Do you believe this? Okay, now just repeat after me. And they don't explain to them what exactly they're repeating. And so I've seen people say, okay, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan rasulullah. And they say, oh, congratulations, you're Muslim. You just got your shahada. Congratulations on your shahada. And I've seen some of a couple of people, and they don't know what's going on. People are giving them hugs, they're giving them gifts, they're giving them bags like you have the ISNA bags, and they're getting all these gifts. And a friend of mine and I, we joke, if you ask one of those persons, so what did you get from that, from those Muslims? He'll open up his bag and say, well, I got some dates, and I got some artwork, and oh, I got a shahada too. I don't know what all this stuff is, but this is some of what they've given me. And because they haven't identified with that. So identity, even at the level of the shahada, is essential. It's a condition. The shahada won't be proper unless they identify with the shahada. So when in any part of our practice of the faith, we have to build an identity around it that supports it. So in our families, building the Muslim identity. In our schools, in our marriages, in our communities, it's very important. And we cannot compromise the essentials of the deen, but we have to discuss what exactly defines us as our identity as American Muslims, as Canadian Muslims, as Muslims in whatever country it is that we might be coming from. And it's so important that it should be discussed at the level of the fard al-ain, at the essential Islamic knowledge. When we talk about what is each and every Muslim obligated to know and to study, we list out the Iman, faith, and Islam, the practice of Islam, and then the purification of the heart, and the three essential subjects of Islam. But we don't hear a lot about discussions about identity and what does it mean to be a Muslim in this day and age, and how to navigate around things, especially when you have so many differences in the modern age. Every single person, or many people, even the youth. One time I was surprised that a third grader answered her phone in one of the classes that I was given. I said, oh, you have a phone? And now they're even younger, they have phones. So once you have a phone, and especially a smartphone with internet connection, the whole world is open to you. And so many avenues of defining your identity is open to you. The internet is open to you. And YouTube's, there are hundreds of millions of different lectures that you can listen to affect your formation of your identity as a Muslim. So there's a lot out there, and there's a lot of danger, but there's also a lot of benefit. By having the world opened up to us in this way, we can take from the good and stay away from what's what's not beneficial. I just have a few minutes left, and I'll end with a realization that I came to. My parents met on a picket line in the early 70s. I was born in Jordan. I went up to the 3rd grade, and so I experienced part of the culture there, and part of my identity was formed there. I came to the US, we lived in different areas, and then at 18 I went to West Africa and I studied for a number of years and then continued studying with some Mauritanian shuyukh. And I felt at that time that my time as a student during those times of intense study, that's what defined me. And that my teachers were who I was emulating and who were my models, and they were the main defining factor for me in terms of my identity. But later on, as I grew, I realized that my parents and where I was born had an even more more important impact on my identity. By them allowing me the freedom to go off and study, by them giving me Islam, by them making me a Muslim. And subhanAllah, I didn't realize this until I was at the deathbed of my father, Allah yarhamu. When I was at his deathbed, then I realized that what he gave me, and the most important thing that he gave me, was my Islam. And if he had not given me that, then all of the further studies, all of the journeys that I had taken, the journeys in West Africa, journeys around in the other parts of the Muslim world, all of that would have not been, would have not happened. It was him making sure that I was born as a Muslim. And even before, when he married my mother, she was not a Muslim at the time, but that was one of the things he told her. He said, we are going to raise our children as Muslims. So he had made that decision before I was even born. And that's what was even more of an impact on my identity than the later experiences that I had. So, and then in further study of where he came from and his forefathers, and then on my mother's side, realizing all of those factors were affecting my identity, and studying about those and recognizing those and respecting them and not denying where we came from. So those things are very important for us to study and to understand. The Arabs studied their genealogy, not just to be able to show you their tree, but it impacts your understanding of who you are. It'll give you an understanding of the cultural influences that have been passed down hundreds of years and have a direct impact on your identity. So it's important to understand our past. It's important to understand our parents and what they did and their sacrifices, and not to deny it. No matter what type of illustrious careers or experiences that we have in the future, realizing that the most important aspect of our identity was from our parents. And so this is something that there's an ongoing effort that we all have to do. It's something that is going to be changing throughout life, and it's not something that we should consider as being a nominal aspect of our life. Our identity has to be very steadfast, and it has to be a deep understanding of our identity. I'll leave with a couple of stories. But one is that there was a brother who, unfortunately, he actually left Islam. But during his period when he was struggling with leaving Islam, he was a convert to Islam. He told me there was an issue in the community and it was bothering him. He said, that issue bothered me so much I was ready to take off my kufi. His identity as a Muslim was partly defined by, okay, now I'm Muslim, I'm going to put on a kufi, and this is what's identifying me as a Muslim. So to get out of Islam, I'm going to take off my kufi. There's some people that when I talk to them about Islam, one of the first questions they ask, do I have to dress like that? Because they recognize that a huge part of your identity is your clothing. So they're saying, well, if I'm now going to identify as a Muslim, do I have to dress like that? So dress is has an impact on our identity, but we can't leave it just at the superficial level of dress. Islam has a definite code of dress for men and for women, but we can't make all of our identity just clothing, because then we might fall into the trap of like that brother, and may Allah guide him and bring him back to Islam, where he just thought, if I take off my kufi, I will have left Islam. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all the tawfiq, the success to have strong Muslim identities and to pass this on to our children and to our grandchildren, and in our hope should be even to our great-grandchildren and grandchildren, all the way till Yawm al-Qiyamah. If you've ever seen some of this environmentally friendly cleaning materials called seventh generation, and it's based on a saying of the Iroquois Indians that they would not make a decision until they thought about the impact of 7 generations down. But for us as Muslims, we should say, أصلح لي ذريتي إلى يوم القيامة. May Allah rectify my progeny and keep them Muslim until the Day of Judgment. So whatever we're doing in our identity formation, we should be thinking about, this is going to affect my children for hundreds of years, thousands of years, or however long it's going to take until the Yawm al-Qiyamah comes. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep us in a state of faith, seal us with faith, and give our children faith and a strong Muslim identity rooted in faith until the Day of Judgment. Jazakumullahu khairan.